All right. Well, welcome to the Iron Bison Training Podcast. We have a treat for you today. This is guest number 3, Jay Heck from San Antonio, Texas. I have to tell a story before I say anything more about you. Jay's a good friend of mine, but we met in the most precarious way. A shared friend, Morgan Snyder of Wild at Heart, said, "Hey, Bryan," he sent me an email and it said, "Hey, you need to meet this guy. You're kind of like Captain Winters, and he is too, and you guys have a mission. And I don't know, I'm just feeling prompted. Go meet him." I'm like, "Well, okay." Jay gets the same email. We decide to take the invitation, and we get on a phone call. And I remember sneaking out at lunch one day from my job at the time, more than 10 years ago, and saying, "Hello, hey Jay, this is Bryan. Morgan said we should meet." And we started talking. And before you know it, dreams of how to walk with God, of how to receive from Him, how to hear His voice, were discussed. And one thing led to another, and all of a sudden we're talking about how do we enjoy a journey with a son and a father at the same time, where the father may not even be initiated, where a son doesn't even know what to do, where he's looking at God, he's looking at his dad. How do we initiate both father and son at the same time in an event? And it started off as a dream conversation. Well, fast forward 5 years in the future, my son and I and about 10 other father's sons are in Colorado, on a mountain, being guided in an experience to hear from the Lord and increase our walk with God, and to add skills and skill sets and experiences of really being with the Father, all led by Jay Heck in a nonprofit that he leads called Being Sons. So with that intro, Jay, welcome to the Iron Bison podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
I love it. I love it. Love seeing what you're doing. Love this podcast and this presentation. I love you, buddy. Glad to be
Thank
here.
you. Well, Jay, we exist to do a few things. One is to encourage each other's fitness physically, absolutely flip the mindsets from what our false narrative can be, and turn our mindsets to walking with God, to winning, to really betting on the one who God bet on when He died for us, rose again for us, when He named us. We want to get folks. We want to encourage mindsets to align with Him, and of course we do this all under an encouragement to walk with God in a better, more pure way. And Being Sons is amazing, but Jay, you're one of the leading voices that I know right now who are actually really giving people tools. And they say, "Hey, how do I walk with God?" You're one of the guys that's been doing it for 10 years. We're very strong in saying, "Hey, this is how you do it. This is why you do it. This is who you are." You wrap it in identity. Jay, tell us about what your core offering right now and who you are, and how this comes into play.
Yeah, great question. My story's had religion in it from the very beginning. So there was a lot of arriving on a regular basis to a place, or a house of worship, and a constant reminder of my sin, a constant reminder that I had an obligation to be there, and my security with God, who holds the universe in His hands, holds my eternal salvation in His hand, felt to me like I needed to keep Him happy with me. So it was very behavior, very works oriented, and yet even with that, thankful that I had a God who was willing to step into this life as a human, do the work that needed to be done, the terrible work that needed to be done to save me and to bring me back to Him. But what I couldn't shake through all of my youth was that I didn't really think He liked me. I looked at an image of Him on a regular basis, And every time I looked at the image, I thought he's a good, powerful, smart God who holds the universe in his hands. And he has done the work to invite me into heaven forever. But he must be really pissed at me um, to have put him in the position that he needed to come and he needed to rescue me. And that's a hard thing to carry for 20 years of your life, and then try to actually enjoy God. And if you don't enjoy God and you don't believe God enjoys you, there's only so far that you can go before you just punt and say, I'm out of here,
Right. So
in
hey,
one way or another.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Jay, I think a lot of us can relate. Is God really happy with me? And
Yeah.
wait, you just offered a interesting invitation for folks that may not know it. You can actually enjoy God. There's joy with us and God. He's not just a relic. He's not just a place we go, but there's a relationship there that is full of joy. That's an interesting invitation. And I'm just reminded a few years ago, five or more, I'm at Canyon Lake with Jay at a 40 guy men's retreat, and Jay's laying down some of these thoughts, especially around joy. And our good friend Rich Pantus is there, and we're at this really nice place on Canyon Lake and really clear water, and it's a wonderful setting and an invitation for guys to have joy around God, around a men's retreat. And a lot of times our experiences have been, well, let's go be good and let's put on fake stories and tell people how good we are. And if we act good enough, people accept us, and then we can go to the church camp and be accepted. And you kind of threw that out of the wall. You said, nah, that's a bunch of bullshit. We are going to be authentic and we're going to invite God into our stories. And I remember thinking, how's he going to do this? I remember you getting on a jet ski. We had jet skis and sailboats, and we had some manly fun things. And for those who don't know, Jay was a pretty accomplished jet skier. Spent lots of years in the water. there's some
Yeah.
there's some videos and some links I'm going to put in the show notes that can show some of this stuff. But Jay, I remember you started to do a 360 in the water with your jet ski, and we're all on the edge watching you do this. I'm thinking, what is he doing? And it's creating this wake, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Then before we knew it, and this is regular ski do. He jumps up and into the water, pops out, and all of a sudden you're on the back of the jet ski, not even at the controls. The jet ski flips you in the air. You do like a backflip, and you land 2 feet from the shore, about crashing the rocks, letting off a wild Indian scream, "Whoa!" and land. And I thought, we all just dropped our drink and looked and said, "Wow, he about killed himself." But he did like the coolest backflip off a jet ski I can ever remember. And at that moment, I said, "There's a joy in here. There's an invitation for joy to do a backflip off a jet ski in our relationship with God. Where does this joy intersect?" You said, what changed for you? You came with the very, God's not happy with me, to finding joy and leading others towards joy. How did you discover that?
Oh gosh, I guess there's two elements that story. There's more elements than that we could dive into, but two in particular that are worth mentioning. I grew up with a poverty mentality, that I don't deserve good things. I don't deserve vacations. I don't deserve nice things. I don't deserve a nice house. And you know what? I don't. So I thought I actually have to deny myself good things. Yeah. So there was a moment when my kids were younger, back in 2012. So I've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. And I would go to work every day, and at lunchtime I would go to a barbecue restaurant nearby, and it was right next to one of these cycleplexes where they sell all kinds of ATVs and motorcycles and jet skis. And so during my lunch break, I would walk in and out of all of these pieces of machinery that I had grown up thinking I don't deserve the joy or the recreation to own a, a fun toy that has a machine in it that needs gasoline and oil. Growing up, every once in a while, somebody would gift us with a day out on the lake, and it was just one of the most joyful things. Some of my most joyful memories as a kid was being on the lake and somebody teaching me to water ski, teaching me how to wakeboard, stuff like that. And I absolutely love inviting other people to learn how to do stuff like that. So for years, I would go eat barbecue and I would dream. And the category of being a son of God was something that came quickly to me, but the practicing of it, the learning what it means, the operational definition of being a son of God took a lot of time to flesh out. And it came to me through a lot of moments. And I'll say most of the moments of practicing sonship, learning sonship, are much smaller than this one. But for years, God had me wandering through the showroom of this place, and I began wondering, God, are you really wanting me to pay a lot of money for a couple of these so that my family can go out on the lake? And one of the most defiant acts of joy, one of the most terrifying acts of joy I ever did was to purchase those sea-doos. I couldn't believe I did it, all the way to the signing of it, the paying of the money. I just thought, this is one of the most crazy things in the world. This is either going to be one of the most right things that I have done in the kingdom, in my relationship with God, or it's going to be one of the worst decisions and it's going to come back to haunt me. And it ended up being just an ongoing series of joyful experiences, not only for me and my family, which I needed, but to invite other men into it. Just to go on a one-on-one, a guy who needed somebody to talk to, and to be able to, drive our jet skis up the 3 miles up the lake, but then it goes into the Guadalupe River, and then you can go 8 miles up the river, with an ever narrowing banks on either side, and you begin seeing the wildlife, and then eventually you park it somewhere where there's a tree that has a rope swing in it, and you just spend an afternoon, you smoke a cigar, you drink a beer, and you have that conversation about the goodness of God. And
Heck yeah.
all that joy and that adventure is something that most people had never had, and it was still new to me. Every time I did it, I felt like God's favorite son. Not only that I could do it on my own skis, I didn't really care about that. What became prevalent was my desire to invite other people into it. And so it always involved an adventure. It always involved loving lavishly another human being. And when that happens, the heart opens up and you're able to have conversations with people that you wouldn't otherwise have. And so that weekend that you experienced was honestly, it was just that.
Yeah.
On a different scale. It was just inviting more men to come in and talk about God, have an adventure, feel loved on, good food, good snacks, good drinks, and deep, profound conversation about the goodness of God around the topic of the identity of sonship. And I loved bringing my sea-doos out there so that people could, go and explore the lake. And I think my heart was so full by the end of 2 days that was just me being playful and joyful on the lake.
Well, what I love, Jay, at some point, you said something interesting. You said, I don't deserve it. At some point, you had to change your mindset and said, maybe I don't, but God says I do. And he's inviting me into it. And you had to flip your mindset. You had to say, you had to go from a scarce, poverty-minded, poor, with lack, I don't deserve it. At some point, you said no. You got defiant. You used the word defiant joy. You defied.
Yeah.
You said, you know what? I might feel scarce, poor, undeserved. But the same flip of the coin, someone died for me, someone lived for me, and someone invited me into joy. I'm going to put the gas down. You had the nutsack to get on this, and break your mindset and really walk into your true identity. And what I loved, when you release your hands from a scarce mindset, all of a sudden you're not only enjoying these jet skis, you're giving them away. I have a picture that rotates through my Google Photos and my Apple Photos on my phone and on my laptops of the sun going down on Canyon Lake at that same event. It's pretty emotional. I get choked up because it brings back so many fun memories. It's you and I on the pair of jet skis. The sun's going down. We're cheating. We're not supposed to be on the lake. It's getting dark, and the lake is pink. And the sky is ablaze with God's glory. It's like a glory cloud. And here we are cutting nuts and doing figure eights and hooting and hollering. And we're on the edge of adventure. The sun's going down, the sky's lit up, and you gave away all that joy. And if you back it up, you had to have the moxie to say, no, I'm not the scarce orphan who doesn't deserve things. I'm going to get these. I feel like I'm invited by God. You relaxed your posture on who you were, and all of a sudden now you're acting generously. Now you're in a position to give away just like God does. There's nothing held, there's nothing tight, there's nothing, oh, what if I don't have enough gas? We burned through so many gallons of gas that weekend. And you're like,
Yeah.
you're like, come ride with me. Let's go. Who's next? Who's next? Who wants to experience this again? And I just saw, okay, that's sonship. There's where God is. He's an abundant God that gives to his kids, but sometimes it takes us acting and going through his invitation and going through the crucible per se. And I was a direct benefactor of that. And Jay, I've seen you do that many times. Things you work on in years past, going down your story of and healing from things like scarcity, and then giving it away. We were on a something you do very way to talk about giving away is that you lead father-son adventures into the mountains to find God and to hear from God and experience him, not only through text, through study of scripture to give us an understanding, but then to actually put us in the mountains and put us in adventures, whether it rain, sun, storm, or shine, to experience him. I know you remember where we were going at Trailhead in the San Juan Mountains in Colorado about 4 years ago with my son, who was 17 at the time, Calvin, and I, and you and Bear, and a bunch of father's sons. But tell us a little more about how you went from, just working on your journey personally to giving it away to then leading groups of guys through adventures you call Trailhead under your Being Sons nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, anything and everything that I do, it's just the continuation of my personal story. That's it. I mean, I feel like I do nothing original at all. I grew up having a relationship with my dad, and some of the sweet moments of connection with my dad were around Cub Scouts. Boy Scouts didn't last very long. Boy Scouts, I wasn't in a very good troop, and so I was only there for about a year. But there were a few places that I felt growing up that I had my dad's heart, and I loved it. And it was camping, or it was canoeing down some beautiful rivers in like the Pennsylvania, Delaware area. And I remember one time we were camping, just tent camping somewhere, and I saw some guys coming out of the woods. There was two guys coming out of the woods, and they're all dressed in their 70s, 100% cotton gear, and they had the big external frame packs on, and this massive non-synthetic cotton sleeping bag, at the top of this thing. And they were obviously coming off of the mountain or out of the hills, and they'd been there for a while. And I remember in my
Mm.
heart thinking, oh my God, they are so radical that they could go and sleep in the woods. What if they got killed by a wolf or a bear or something like that? And so there was this desire inside my heart, planted probably around the age of 7 or 8 years old, that I wonder what it would be like to go and do that. So most of my camping growing up as a kid was relegated to tent camping out of the back of a car, and I loved it. That was great. But I kept wondering, what would it be like to take it to the next level, to actually be self-sustaining overnight? Could I ever do that? And the hard, critical places, in my own mind and my own heart said, I can't do that. I could never do that. I
Yeah.
don't have any of that gear. So anyway, as I got married, one of the things that I asked for as a wedding gift was a backpacking tent. And uh, so anyway, it sat on my shelf for years. And it was probably around 2000. It was 2010, probably around 2010. And this category that I'm not just a Christian, I'm just not meant to be somebody who fills a pew. I'm not just a member of an organization. I'm not here just to take money out of my account and put it into the account of an organization so that they can spiritually feed all these people. Like, I'm actually being invited to have this intimate relationship with God that's called Father and Son. I thought
Mm.
that it was just kind of a cute metaphor throughout all of Scripture, but I had never had a human being ever tell me that metaphor was something that wasn't metaphor. It was
Yes.
actually meant to be taken seriously. Like, that is the true nature of my relationship with God. And that it takes a lot of small decisions and big decisions to begin to wrap your mind and, more importantly, your heart around and begin believing. And so I am now 15 years into that. So God invited me to be his son. My heart heard him invite me to be his son in 2008. And my initial question was, well, what does that look like? And he did not answer.
What?
Like, but the question, I'll back up and tell you, God allowed me to get really frustrated with a lot of the things in my life that I was aware were not going well. And I actually began to write in my journal all the times that I had been hurt or angry in a particular way. And
Mm.
he incited this incident. And so I began writing and writing and writing, so that I could come to the end of that 4-day experience in the mountains of Colorado, where I'm surrounded with other men, and I could take that question to God, and I wanted him to talk to me. I want you to speak to me, God. And at the end of it, I opened up my journal. I had all this data. I said, look at all the work I'm doing to try and get close to you. Um, what What's the problem? What's your solution? What do you have to say about this? And I didn't hear anything from him. And at that point, I just thought, I'm giving up. I'm so frustrated with this distant God who's always angry at me, and he's not really telling me how I
Right.
can get right with him. Like, there's no joy in our relationship whatsoever. It's just anger. It's just always a sense of shame, and I'm disappointing you over and over and over again. And every time I want you to speak to me, I'm risking disappointment of not hearing from you. So he lets all this come to a culmination over the course of whatever 38 years of my life. And here I am on a mountaintop, and I said, what do you have to say? And I didn't hear anything. So I threw my journal down and I said, screw it. I don't care. I'm going to stop trying. And I laid my head back in the grass, and that's when I heard the voice of God, not an audible voice, but he spoke to my heart, and he said, you were never the beloved son. would you like to be? Would you like to be my beloved son?
Mm.
And I realized in that moment, he was absolutely right. There was what he cracked open and exposed in me was this desire to crawl into his lap and not have to run my own life. I just wanted a dad that I felt liked me, would go to bat for me, would speak to me, would provide for me, would protect me, and all of my anger, my rage, my unhappiness, my shame, all of that was centered around the lie that I don't have somebody bigger than me, stronger than me, whose love for me exceeds my love for him. And in the moment, just the idea that everything that I've been believing may not be true. Maybe I do have a loving God.
Yeah.
Who's not only went to bat for me one time, but by providing his son, but he's pissed off about it. But maybe he's inviting me into a lifelong relationship with him because that's what he wants. And that's what he needs. I know it's a big thing to think that God needs anything, but anyway, I began to felt like God in his heart as an emotional being, as a soul, was aching for me.
Oof.
And that was something that I just could not wrap my mind around because I didn't even feel likable. Okay, so this is all going somewhere in a story. So early on in this invitation to wrap my mind around this new relationship with God as my father and me being a son that he actually loves and likes spending time with,
Yeah.
like, what do I do with that now? Like, how exactly do you move deeper into that reality? How do you practice it? What are the steps that I need to take to move from shame into whatever superior emotion or dominating reality he's inviting me into? And one day, not long after that, I'm in my garage and I'm asking Jesus in prayer, like what, or asking the Father, right? Because I had actually asked Jesus, do you mind if I start praying all of my prayers to the Father instead of you? It's always been you my whole life. Do you mind stepping aside? Because I really need to start talking to God the Father. And the kindest thing, I just sensed him say to me, Jay, that has been the goal all along. I have only been a pathfinder for you to lead you to the Father. So I actually saw him, for those of you who can see the video here, like in my mind's heart, I actually saw him do this, and
Wow.
like point to the Father with this huge grin on his
Yeah.
face. And it's like he stepped out of the way. And what I realized years later was that I actually needed Jesus to teach me how to be a son. So I needed to go back to him and say, I need you to teach me how to approach the Father on these things. But anyway, one day I'm in my garage and I look and I've got these shelves. I'm always trying to figure out how to better organize my shelves in my garage because my wife and I and our two kids have so much stuff. And there's this section in my garage that had all of this on sale backpacking gear that I'd been collecting for over a decade and had never once used. Over the course of a decade, I'd see a little mini camp stove, I'd see a little, camp chair, backpack that was last year's model that was on sale. I had all this stuff to go backpacking, and it all went to that dream it all went back to the dream that I had when I was camping with my dad, car camping with my dad, and I saw that guy come out of the mountains, and I thought, I don't know that I could ever do that. Well, I'd actually
Yeah.
been investing in all of that, and I heard God say to me, let's go solo backpacking, just you and me. And I was like, what? That's crazy. I can't do it. I'll get killed. I'll get eaten by wolves and bears. He's like, I'll be with you. And so that was one of the biggest, earliest risks I ever took to step into my identity as a son. I pulled all that stuff
Wow.
off the shelf,
Yeah.
and I figured out how do I get food. And anyway, I remember packing 3 times as much stuff as I
Of
could
course.
possibly take. Right, of course, right, in the back of my pickup. And I drove 2 hours to a local state park, which was absolutely beautiful. And I picked out the most remote primitive camping spot 8 miles away, and I overpacked. And um, and I remember with a 65, 70-pound pack on, I step onto the trail, and there's nobody else around. And my first step basically is onto a step with a river that's running around the step. And I said, Jesus, I don't want to do this without, or I said, actually, Father, I don't want to do this without you. And I have no idea how to do anything like this with you. Are you here with me? I didn't hear anything. And I said, but I want to do this with you. So let's go. So we just started moving, and I just began talking out loud as if God was right there and that like he cared what I had to hear.
Yeah.
And I just began talking like a buddy on the trail. And it was a life transforming experience to go backpacking with God. And why do I now take men and sons backpacking? Because that's just a part of my story.
Yeah. And Jay,
It,
what I absolutely love about that story is you said the words, he cared what you had to say. He cared to actually hear you. Again, in your personal story, there's a mindset change. There's a
yeah.
value change. There's an exchange of I'm not worthy of God hearing my voice to not only are you worthy, he cares. He cares about the content. He doesn't want to
Yeah.
just show up. He cares, he curates, he invites into your story. The value of who you are is flipped. And what I've seen is that you did this on your personal journey, and then fast forward, so many years later, you're leading sons and dads into not just 2 hours away, a state park. You're going into 12,000-foot peaks, partnering with guides in Colorado where it might rain for 3 days straight, and you're taking on cold rain. We were out there a few years ago, my son and I, with you and the crew, and we saw mosquitoes the size of B-52 bombers.
Yeah.
I mean, we're literally, our
Yeah.
necks have blood trails down them. They're like, you could follow the mosquitoes by following the blood on our necks. And
Millions of them.
right.
Millions.
I
Yeah.
mean, we didn't have enough DEET. The DEET was gone.
Mhm.
And at the same time, it was hard. It was uncomfortable. It was cold. It was wet, and it was worth it. It was an adventure that I will always remember with my sons. We, as a family, we're hunters in Idaho, and we do this quite frequently. Take on the hard things, get uncomfortable, do things that push you and get you to places where you can hear God's voice clear, and you push into these uncomfortable, disruptive situations. But you do it. You guide people to do this, and it's a particular context. We're with a group of 10 father and sons, and we're 3, 4, 5 miles into the Colorado backcountry, and you're like, hey, one of the things we're gonna do, guys, we're gonna listen. We're gonna listen to God through a couple exercises. I want your pen and your journal out, and I just want you to write what your heart thinks you're hearing. And so you had me and our fathers, and got together with our sons, and we just wrote, and then we got to share those things. And it was one of, for most guys like myself, I'm pretty gas pedal down, action first, and we'll figure it out later. And you had us pause, and you had to settle our heart, and we're at 12,000 feet with no cell phone coverage, thank God. And we're just writing to God, and then we get to share that with our son. It was some of the most intimate spiritual times, exercise I've ever done, mostly because of the setting and the time away and the less distraction. And then we have a guide such as yourself who's gone there and done it yourself before you had to give it away. But then you said, we're going to crank it up one more level. You said at 3 a.m., we're setting alarms. We're getting up and we're climbing this 1,000-foot boulder field onto a plateau at night, and we're going to have breakfast. And some of the guys who had never done anything hard before, this was their first foray into the wild. I mean, we're talking guys that are bringing CPAP machines, and we got backpacks that are stuffed with 70, 80 pounds. They're having the initial experience of pushing into adventure of, can I do this? And we're seeing moose. There's bear tracks and bear scat everywhere. There's a lot of fear going through some of the camp for guys who've done this for the first time.
Yeah.
And we had you and me and some other guys that had been there a little bit so we could comfort them, but it didn't replace the step that they had to take up this boulder field at 3 a.m. with headlamps on to do something new that they'd never done before. Some of these guys are from flatland Texas with no hills, and they're saying, you know what, we're going to do it. And particularly I wanted to highlight, it's 3 a.m. We're traveling this boulder field. Guys are rolling their ankles and stubbing their shins against the rocks and sweating and crying and getting super uncomfortable. And one of the guys that was just pushing himself, he had some extra weight he was carrying, but he wasn't giving up. He was in the back of the pack, and Jay and I, we were back there help encouraging him, and we kind of wondered afterwards, like, man, I hope he makes it. Like, he's pretty struggling. And we slow down and we take some calm. And at that point in time where you and I were sharing our doubt, his son, who was probably 13, 14 at the time, was way up front. He was almost to the top of the plateau, miles ahead. All of a sudden, we see this headlight coming backwards. And we're like, who's that? And they're like, they're coming backwards. And they pass, 8 pairs of fathers and sons, and they come all the way to the back where we were. And he gets arm in arm. Oh, powerful. Arm in arm right in front of us. And he goes, Dad, let's go. You're going to make it. We're going to make it up here. We're going to do it together. We're not going to stop. And by God, the son took the father's arm, and they maneuvered boulder fields. He's wiping the blood off the dad's shins, the sweat off his brow. And you can see the confidence rise. You can see the dad go, wait a minute, I can do this. And the other fathers and sons are cheering him on and saying, good job, you can do it. We're relacing boots, and now we're adjusting straps on backpacks, and we're tightening the things in. And, it wasn't a couple hours later that we're all on top of this 12,000-foot plateau, watching the stars fade and the sun rise. And, and the sun's rays were hitting everybody's face. And I looked around and said, oh, I don't know if God had this in mind when he said, I want you to be my son. But we just saw an exchange and a guided experience where we all experienced God rescue a dad who was going to give up. And he did it through his son in a community of men on an adventure where we were encouraged to put ourselves in situations where God had to come through. It was one of the most defining experiences that I've ever experienced in a community of men. You were there guiding it. We didn't orchestrate it, and God came through. And again, there's Jahak giving away years later what you first experienced and first said, I'm going to take a step with 80 pounds on my back, never done solo camping, and I'm going to go with God. And then fast forward, you're giving this away to create and let God, time and frames where God has to show up, and he does time and time and time again. Jay, what's it been like to see folks take the first steps, curated an experience like you did many, many, many years ago, but you got to help them. You got to guide them. What's it like to give that away?
It's the source of joy. I mean, what's it like? I mean, that's why I would go 65 miles an hour in a straight direction on a Sea-Doo, and then put all my body weight on one side and then twist the handlebars as quick as I can just to see how far it's going to fling me. It's just total joy. It's just God's got me. And it's just, there's so much beauty. There's beauty on so many different levels. It makes me feel like the most blessed luckiest man in the world. And I would have, I don't actually like using the word luck. That's why I said blessed first. But I went from being a young man that probably would have been willing to trade my life for a bunch of other men's lives to really loving the story that I'm in. I mean, I have so much respect and so much love for so many men. Of course, there's things about my life and about my situation that I would love to get an upgrade to, but I wouldn't trade my story. I wouldn't trade my life. I wouldn't trade my history with God. I wouldn't trade my understanding of my calling in the kingdom of God with anybody. I just love it. Love the journey, love where I am, what I'm doing now. And it makes me very excited to think that a year from now, there's going to be some new facet of this heart that God's given me that I have not yet seen. And that excites me. Like, what will the next adventure look like? Where will it be? Where will we go? What will I learn? How will God come through?
So,
And to see that in other men,
yeah,
and to see the transformation of other men who are taking that risk to practice sonship in their own homes and with their sons and their daughters, to have categories for practicing being sons and daughters of God. And then over the years, hearing their stories of how those adventures have changed the trajectory of their lives, I just don't think there's anything that could possibly top that.
I love the phrase "loving the story you're in."
Mm.
That's it's probably a book chapter, a title to part of your life. Loving the story you're in, and for the listeners, some of you, it's going to be pretty disruptive. Pretty disruptive. How to love the story you're in. And one of the things I love hanging out with Jade, we talk once or twice a month for 10 years. It's been one of the post sign markers in my life. How am I doing? I need to ask Jade. I need perspective. I got a brother who's walking in this, as am I. Where am I missing it? Where's my blind spots? And Jay, you've always been that for me in everything I've done. And what I love about what you also do, you get really, we've talked about adventure and fitness and doing these great things. But if you're a listener thinking, oh, I don't do those things, it even can be on the smallest level of sonship. And I was just reminded today, before this podcast, I have a a story of Christmas hurt. Christmas was very scarce in our household growing up. There wasn't a whole lot of resources. Parents were living off government cheese more than we were steaks and going out to eat. And sometimes there was oranges and underwear, and I'm thankful for it, for my parents for providing that. But when you wake up as a kid Christmas morning, oranges and underwear are not necessarily what you want. They're probably what you need, but they're not what you want for Christmas. And I was reminded today, even my wife holds great tension to help me rewrite my Christmas story. And I never really had good memories. Not that they were bad, but of putting up Christmas trees and family, and grew up in a divorced family, and Dad wasn't around, and so there was a lot of incongruency with Christmas, like putting ornaments up and having fun and having cider and the music going, and something small. Just this morning, my wife's like, "Hey," she created some space for us to put up the ornaments together, put on the music, and invite me into rewriting an experience as small as putting up ornaments, and inviting God into the joy of that. And rather than having these memories of lack or scarcity, or I wish it could have been better, it's like, hey, we're going to change our mindset. We're going to partner with God, invite him into something as small as putting in up ornaments, and reframe this into these memories that have caused hurt. At 47, rewrite the histories of your experience around Christmas. It wasn't on a mountain. It was in my living room, an hour ago. And what I love, Jay, you do so well is you teach people adventures are great, and we experience God there. And there's crafted experiences that help facilitate our discussion with God and our growth. There's also the dailies, and we have about 15 minutes left of this podcast. Jay, would you help us if you wanted to? The time is late. We're in a season where we need to be connected to God, and I know one of your prime missions is to help people pray, practice, and find God. Would you help us and our listeners pray and find God? Hey Jay, I'm not hearing you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, yeah, it's one of my great joys to practice with other men hearing God's voice. But I will say this: it takes practice. It takes practice.
How do we start? Where do we go?
I think we start by being really honest with God about what we fear about the practice or the discipline of hearing Him. Truth is, I don't know a single father-son relationship that's good that doesn't have good communication. My dad did a lot of things really well. Looking back, one of the things that I wished I had more of, which would have required courage on my part and my dad's part, I wish we had talked more from the heart about things.
Yes.
Just, I wish that I had felt like he knew me better. I wished he had asked more questions about the things that interested me and why I felt that way. And he was curious, and he said, "Hey, I kind of want to learn more about that with you." And I wanted him to tell me things that were going on in his heart. And I wanted him to invite me into the things that interested him. My dad was a great dad. I love my dad. I'm so thankful for what he was able to offer, but you're only able to offer what you have. And one of the things that I had encouragement from other men to do was ask my dad his story. And I began hearing my dad's story, and it just makes so much sense that he was only able to offer to me out of the capacity that he had that was given to him when he was younger. So I say all that to say that there was a question in my mind and my heart about my father's accessibility and his interest in me. And that had a profound effect on my convictions about hearing God's voice. Not only that, but I was familiar enough with Scripture to know that people who claim to hear God's voice, they better be right. Otherwise, you get stoned. There are the stories of prophets and pastors, I'll say false prophets, pastors and church leaders and ministry leaders. And then there's the psycho guy that goes and he bombs an abortion clinic because God told him to do it. And I mean, they're all over the news now. People who are literally doing satanic things, and they're actually saying, "I am Jesus," or "Jesus told me to do this." And I just thought, you know what? That's just too messy. I'm staying away, right? So all that leads to a series of convictions and fears that we bring with us whenever somebody invites us into the possibility that we could have a dialogue with God. And if we're not honest about those things and we don't voice them to God, well, then they're always going to be there. And I'll say this is so important. God knows all of those fears that we have better than we do. He knows what's buried under the surface. And so I just have witnessed in my life that as I take baby steps into learning how to hear God's voice, he's not just going to start speaking things to me without addressing all of those fears. Reality is, I'll never trust what God says to me without him at the same time concurrently addressing all of those fears and all those lies. It's going to go hand in hand. So somebody who's learning to hear God's voice, and this is particularly prevalent the older you are, the more you've been in church, the more you've been exposed to the news. Goodness, for young kids, they have no problem hearing God's voice. I mean, they're built for it. Just once you pile all of the religious crap in our minds and in our hearts and the fears, that's what gets in the way. It's like a wall that we have built to try and protect ourselves from mishearing, misrepresenting, being wrong, living in shame. And so as we begin hearing God's voice, we should not be surprised that he's going to pick up one of those bricks and he's going to put it in front of us and he's going to say, you're asking me about question A. Thank you for asking me. What I want to do is I want to address this brick right here. Let's talk about this brick. And we tend to think, oh, that brick is evidence that I can't hear God's voice. God's saying, no, we need to address the brick so that we can remove it and we can see each other and dialogue with one another better and better. So practicing hearing God's voice, which has been a rescue for me because I thought well into the invitation to be God's son. Well, sonship is going to be the invitation into his provision and his protection and other things. And I began experiencing those. But one of the things that I was really, really cautious about, and I delayed practicing, was hearing God's voice because I was so afraid of getting it wrong. But you eventually come to a place where you realize this relationship can go no further without a major upgrade to communication. And so it was unavoidable. I had to take the risk and exercise the courage of asking God a question and then learning to be still, shut up, and just trust that he's going to speak. But when I would do that, then all these fears would come up and all these lies. And I just thought, well, I just can't hear God's voice. Actually, that's not what's happening. When we get still and we get present, all that crap comes to the surface and God allows it to come to the surface so that we can say, hey, God, I just asked you a question and now my mind and my heart are raging with anger that you're not going to speak to me. Now, either that's me, that's the enemy, or what if that's God allowing that to come to the surface so that I can ask him about that? I may be asking him about whether I should buy a car or not.
Yeah.
What I should do with my day.
Yeah.
That's the excuse to enter into a dialogue. And he's going to say, hey, while you're here, before I answer that, how about I make you deeply and profoundly aware of the lie that you're believing that you can't hear my voice? Like he has to deal with that. And so as we're learning, do not be surprised if all of that stuff comes to the surface. It's a concurrent growth and in evolution in our thinking that we can hear God's voice, and there are certain ways that he sounds, but it's also the unraveling of all the lies. He's going to do both of those things at the same time. So every time we go and we ask him a question, he's going to allow one of those lies to come to the surface. And so we're like, here, okay, all right, here it is again, God, I can't hear your voice. Or, I have to go and get something right before I can hear you. Is that you or is that me? Like, is that your voice or is that another voice? And then shockingly, but consistently, I will hear God God will come to me and other men who practice this, and he'll say, no, that wasn't me. That anger, that fear, that shame, that disqualification, that diminishment, that thing that you've wrestled with your whole life. Well done for getting still enough to allow that terrifying operational reality that you've lived in to come to the surface. Thank you for asking me what I have to say about that. And that's where the lies get unraveled.
Wow.
And that's where, with greater clarity and confidence, we can begin moving boldly into the presence of God in anticipating more and more good things. Truth be told, many of us are dead in spirit and soul, or at least we feel close to death, because over the course of our lives, somebody has either dealt us an incredible blow, a couple times in our lives, something really devastating and violent, or our soul has died by the equivalent of 1,000 paper cuts, thousands of words of not affirmation, but of devaluation. And what I'm finding is that for years, I wanted God to come with like a single word or revelation in my dialogue or prayer with him that was going to change my life, and it was going to completely heal me. Now, I've had some good moments where God has spoken, like the moment where he said, "You are never the beloved son. Would you like to be my beloved son?" Holy smoke, incredible.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
moment in my garage, and he says, "I want you, or I'm inviting you to go on a backpacking trip with me." Absolutely life-changing. I had to act on both of those. I had to practice both of those. Another invitation was to run a marathon with him. And I was like, I've never run more than 6 miles in my life. I don't think my body's designed for that. I know the DNA of my family. I don't think I can do that. But it was life-changing, right? But
Yes.
what I'm finding is that the most profound growth in me is coming. It's life by 1,000 words of affirmation. Just like death by 1,000 cuts.
Yep.
I wanted God to speak that word, which would change my life forever, but he speaks little tiny things. I've got journals just filled with words where he says kind things to me, and I have to look at them and I have to read them out loud and go, should I believe this? Like when I look in the mirror, when I wake up in the morning, I never speak this kindly to myself. But if I'll just write what feels like the overflow, and I don't edit it, and I don't get squirm in my seat when I feel like he's speaking kindly to me, and I just write what I feel is coming out of my heart, and then I look at it, and then I can decide, is that just a bunch of bunk? Or is that actually God? Then I can begin applying some things I know about God to it. And I can say, God, here's what I just read. I'm honestly uncomfortable with this because of this and this and this. Okay. Was that you, or was I making that up? And then to have God answer that simple question. That's how God speaks. And that's how God teaches us to hear his voice.
Wow, Jay, there's so many more questions to ask about that process, but for this session, we're going to conclude with that story. And I'm disrupted because I have more questions but we don't have as many hours as we need to answer them right now. But I know as listeners, you're probably wondering, I want to hear God like that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start practicing. Where do I go? And for those who want more, Jay has a ton of resources on beingsons.com. But Jay, is there a particular resource if a listener says, I got to get on the journey? I want to start listening to God, like you said, life in a little phrases every day over time so I can hear the big questions. Where do I go to get started?
Mm. Yeah, great question. Well, you can go onto the website. On the homepage of my website, you can scroll down, and there is a free PDF that I created that has been really, really helpful to me. It basically helps create it's scriptures, it's some diagrams that help someone like me who has a great fear of mishearing or misrepresenting what I'm hearing or misinterpreting what I'm hearing.
Yep.
It what I needed was like a filter, like anything that doesn't sound like this, look like this, feel like this, just completely discard it. Also, it takes the pressure off of well, if I mishear, is the world going to crash down and fall? Well, no, actually, like it's a practice. Like it's like a kid, it's like a 2-year-old in a sandbox. You build
Yes.
something, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. But God takes incredible delight that there are a few individuals in the world who are not taking their own counsel, but instead are actually looking to him and going, okay, I'm willing to take the risk. Will you meet me? Even if that means you come 10 million miles and I only travel a foot. I'm turning my face toward you. I want to begin hearing you, and God is going to meet you there. So I think that's a really encouraging resource to go and get that.
Okay.
And then also, if you have access to a fire with some other men, Bryan, you and I obviously have been gathering with men around fires for years, and that's been one of the primary practices. I never do a fire without uh, practicing hearing God's voice with a bunch of other guys, and we all just learn together. And it's amazing how much better you can get at it in 6 months, and then a year, and then 2 years. So, yeah.
So you're saying, Jay, yeah, so we'll conclude with that. We have beingsons.com. We're going to have the resource in the show notes. It's a great exercise to start with. That PDF, we'll have that in there as well. But yeah, also you mentioned fires, doing it so you have a journey alone, singularly with God that you go on, but also in community. And the
Mm-hmm.
fire is just a place to find that. We'll have links to Wild Courage and Being Sons fires and other fires. And they're just a great resources to advance in walking with God. Jay, it's been a great time today. I have a lot of more questions, and so the invitation remains. Hopefully, this can be an ongoing discussion over time where you can share more of your wisdom for the listeners, especially those who say, what's next? I want to
Mm-hmm.
walk with God. Jay, you've been an encourager, an absolute guide, and a guy who walks the walk. He just doesn't give you 5 points to freedom. He actually has lived them, as you can tell from the stories, and will continue to tap into that wisdom. Jay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the very last thing I'd say is thank you for being a coach to me over the years. Just at the right moments, you would always have a word, not even knowing what I was going through. So I love hearing you and seeing you practice sonship in the very unique way that I've known for years. God created you to do it. So to see you here on the Iron Bison format doing it just does my heart so much good. So well done. Thank you. We need your voice.
Thanks so much, Jay. Until next time, Iron Bison Training Podcast. We love you all. Get fit, change your mindset, and above all, walk with God.